you look closely at a single flower in the this Taj Mahal, and you will find that it's so special. It's not carved in relief. It's not a painting. It's like done bit by bit. It has jasper, jade, turquoise, and onyx, and that makes it a kind of a motif which kind of Mughals had for themselves, and that kept passing on. I mean, move to a typical Indian wedding, you might find women wearing lehengas with the similar motifs, and it carries on. I mean, right from designer wear to every other place, you find Mughals leave their motifs everywhere, and then we are keeping them in use. So this is fifth episode of our Art Indica with Dr. Alka Pande and with Nidheesh. And we are talking about ornament, desire, and afterlife of beauty, where we are discussing 500 years of Mughals in this special season. Welcome, Dr. Pande. And we were just talking about how the legacy of these motifs Mughals have left behind for us. So how do we see the whole design quotient of what Mughals have done, what they have left behind?
It's lovely to be back on the episode, and I really like what you said, the afterlife of beauty. Beauty is so, sometimes it can be very ephemeral, it can be momentary, it can be just the whiff of a perfume. So beauty is so beautiful in the sense that it can linger and it can take you to another lofty plane. What was very special about the Mughals and what you were talking about is the kind of beauty that emerged as a result of almost three cultures at that time: Islamic, Persian, and Hindu, what we call Mughal. And flowers became very, very central. Of course, flowers were very central to India too because of the lotus. When we look at mythology and we think immediately of the lotus, Vishnu ki nabhi se bhi, from the creator, from the navel of Vishnu, emerged the lotus. Saraswati sat on the lotus. Lakshmi sat on the lotus. So you see, lotus has been an unending theme in Indian art, and lotus then comes into Buddhist imagery as well. Om Mani Padmaham. And then it is very much part and integral to Islamic and also Mughal culture. You have the lotus gardens, you have the lotus ponds, and the lotus you see going into the Itar dance as well. So flowers become integral. That becomes an integral part of Mughal beauty. And then you see a lot of Mughal beauty in the Prachin Kari of the Hindus, which later came to be known as the pietra dura of the Mughals, the high point of which was in the Taj Mahal. And we also see that the pietra dura talks of a very, very strong cross-cultural influence, that of the Florentine masters of Italy, because you see a lot of pietra dura happening in in Firenze, in Florence, and you see a very, very similar thing happening in India. So obviously, royalty was in touch with each other, and the motifs were simultaneously growing in both continents.
So there are two things to it. One is the technique of pietra dura. I mean, if for our audience, if we can explain that, and then we come to the design part, that why the Mughal these motifs are so special.
So, the pietra dura really was very much also part of their own religious iconography. They did not want human figuration. They did not want any animal depictions also. So what they did through the arabesques and the floral motifs of this Prachin Kari, which was also very laborious, and in Mughal times, labor was also given a very, very high value of aesthetic beauty. It was just not refinement, taste, but beauty was also a point of imperial power. Textiles, for example, and I think we'll
Yes.
probably be talking later
Yes.
about it. But what you see in the Mughal period, they gave a lot of benefit and a lot of uh, a quotient of riches to labor. And pietra dura is an extremely laborious process. You know, first they make a drawing, then they kind of make space and dig it out, and then they put all these precious stones from lapis lazuli, jasper,
Onyx.
onyx. Uh, all these stones are inlaid and they become not just precious because of their intrinsic value, but also of the man hours spent making the pietra dura or the Prachin Kari, which was done. In fact, you see, you were talking of the afterlife. You see that everywhere in India, even today, you see these, you know, little boxes, marble boxes, which we call inlay boxes today, but that inlay is really the Prachin Kari. It is the pietra dura, and it continues to live even today in contemporary times. So this is the afterlife of the beauty of Mughal aesthetics in only one aspect. We'll see as we go along, we'll see the afterlife, as Nidheesh said, in the lehengas, in bridal wear, in decorative
Carpets.
yeah,
Carpets.
carpets.
Yeah,
You
rugs
see
and
that
carpets.
everywhere. You see that, I mean, you even see that in my scarf, the colors and you know, the motifs which emerged by way of the Indo-Islamic, Mughal and European influence which came in. And you see that happening today. So the afterlife of the Mughals is really enormous.
And which others places of that contemporary world, which where you see something similar, like when you look at cities in Iran and the buildings, probably they match or they are like similar.
Um, It's my dream to go to Iran, Nidheesh, and it's been on my bucket list for a long time. And I hope remnants of that will still be there after the war, uh, because I think Iran has won the war, really. And I'm happy about that because it was one of the greatest civilizations. And what you see in the architecture in Shiraz, in Isfahan, the tiles, the colors, and particularly what you see is the uh, arabesques, the floral motifs, which were there in Iran, which came to India, but were then embellished and created by Indian hands. And what we see in this is imperial discipline, we see stability, we see a kind of cultivated beauty, and we see authority. So, this is what came from Iran, from Central Asia to India, and it was the Mughals who took it to another level because before the Mughals, this kind of wealth on beauty was not given a value which was given by the Mughal emperors. One of them, an important aspect is that objects of beauty created by the Mughals, as we were calling them the afterlife, they also become instruments of diplomacy. They talk of political influence. They also talk of cultural exchanges. So these gorgeous objects of absolute beauty which were created and which were exchanged with rulers, with mansabdars, with noblemen who came into the Mughal courts, or anybody who the emperor wanted to give honor to, gave them, as you have mentioned, a robe of honor, a khilat, which meant a transferring of a power onto a person who could be wealthy, who could be powerful, but has been elevated to another higher level through this robe of honor, which was worked on beautifully by the craftspeople in the Mughal ateliers. And they took years sometimes, to create these beautiful textiles. And textiles sometimes had even a greater value than jewels. We don't understand the man-hours that were spent, the kinkwab or the brocade which they made with pure silver and gold threads, which were then so scrupulously sewn into the fabric, the motifs, and then the inlays sometimes which were done, because some of them were even embellished with precious stones in Zardozi, for example. So what was in those textiles was a huge cultural value, a physical value, a value for labor, and it was a robe of honor, of authority.
Yeah.
And that is why when you see the Mughal rulers, look at the way they dressed, look at the way they attired themselves, particularly in the portraits they got done for themselves and in the illustrations of the Pachahnama.
Yeah. So clearly those were times where photography was not there till then, and then the portraiture was one thing. Very lavish, by the way. So everything was, but then besides the flower, I mean, the geometry of it, and and how, like, jalis were something which were, like, I think suddenly we see lots of jalis and the net of marble and those designs.
So, what we see really with the geometry actually speaks of an eternity of life. It's very abstract. And when you are talking of jalis and you are talking of, you said another thing with jalis,
Jharokas, flowers,
flowers.
and
No,
geometry.
but jalis in particular. So you see, jalis came from the Indian side. The domes and the arches came from the Central Asian Mughal side. So the mixing of the two in Mughal architecture showed the syncretic culture, the plurality of the country, that how different traditions were organically fused into one. And the high point of it is actually the CSMVS, the Indo-Saracenic style of architecture, which was very much part of the modernity of India, which over the years absorbed, assimilated, transformed, and translated a new language.
Yeah.
And the geometry which came from the Islamic and Central Asian areas was more to do with the fineness and loftiness of ideas, which was actually non-figurative. So this was a very, very interesting aspect which we see, which came in from the Mughals.
So it was clearly in the buildings, as we're talking about, as in their textile, in their own ornaments they were wearing, and designs they were carrying, which kept passing on. So, and then comes Banaras somewhere where brocade and this comes into their scheme of things.
So brocade becomes a very, very important aspect of Mughal luxury, because this is where they start the whole thing. Weaving was actually elevated. Before that, if you see Kabir, for example, it was not within the Indic tradition of caste and class. They really came into the Shudras, right?
Yes,
The
yes.
weavers.
Yeah.
But the Mughals brought them into a very, very elevated thing, because they were creating robes of honor. They were creating robes of power. They were creating robes of autocracy, really. And they were very, very close to the rulers. So they become very, very important people. And Banaras becomes a very important center of weaving. And what you see, the motifs that you see, there is the shikar bagh, which is the hunting scenes.
Yes.
There is the booties, the Indian paisley, which comes in. And this was the greatest textile tradition of India under the Mughal Empire. It flourished maximum from the 16th to the 19th century, and it combined Persian aesthetics with Indian silk weaving traditions and created a textile language of luxury, refinement, and most importantly, imperial beauty. That is very, very important
Yeah.
to note.
And then comes the Kashmiri shawl, the Kani weave and the buta motif, the curved form, we eventually call again as the paisley we were talking about. So it was like coming from all over and in the finest of the forms.
So this is really very interesting. Kanni becomes very interesting. Kanni takes us to Kashmir, and the word which we start with is the buta, which was almost like a teardrop, and also like a cypress leaf. It then gets the name because it goes to Scotland, and Scotland there's a town called Paisley, and there they started experimenting a lot with the paisley. So it becomes paisley, the buta becomes the paisley. And today we know it as the paisley. But within the Indian tradition, it was also known as the ambi,
Yeah.
because aam ka motif, it looked like a mango. So there were Indian names to the paisleys. And again, we see that it was associated with eternal life, with fire, with fertility, with royal power, and it becomes a sacred emblem of endurance and immortality because it is linked to the cypress.
Yeah.
The cypress is of immortality. It's a very powerful visual metaphor in Islamic thought. So therefore the buta it combines all this. It combines royal power, and it's also because of the stylized cypress tree, we get all these motifs. It's also known as the badam, almond.
Yeah. Yeah.
Almond shaped. It's, as I said, ambi. It's also known as the kajka, which is the flower bed, or the kamya when used as a corner motif, because kanya hai na,
Yeah.
kone mein hai, kanni. So it becomes, because it's a border motif. So, the colloquial language becomes very important. So the word gets translated from a buta to a kanni. So all these are translations through
The language of
orality.
local artisans mixing up
Yeah.
with the fabric they are working with and the design they are like trying to bring in, and that conversation happening with.
Because we are an oral culture, no?
Yes.
Orality is
and
so
keeping the
important.
functionality going, and even then like, getting that excellence bit of it. But let's look at the other objects of it. Like we are talking about this, the jade hookah base, which is again a form where we see that the design aesthetic remains like in the same range, or
So I think in an earlier episode, we had talked about the Mughal love for the jade. They used jade a lot, from goblets to pietra dura to jewelry. So the hookah was a yasho ka shauk.
it was
Luxury
natural,
item.
normal. I mean, I saw my nana having his hookah in not very far from Delhi, and that was like normal.
But that
I mean,
was
hookah
later.
pani band was a very normal word in communities, right?
Yeah.
So it's a not such a yashi thing. It's a more
No,
of a
but that
social
was
community
much
thing.
later. But that was much later. But when originally it started, that's why you had the jade bases.
Yeah, there's a luxury. I mean, hookah is a different designer hookah is a different thing,
So
probably. Yeah.
therefore, when it started originally, it started as a royal emblem, and then it came down, because we always look up, no?
Yeah.
We're always so aspirational. So then the hookah later becomes a common man's cigarette, really. Today, of course, there are hookahs all over. You have hookah
Yeah.
bars and,
Yeah.
in all the clubs all over Europe in particular, they have,
All the Middle East and Turkey,
yeah,
everywhere.
so
Like,
they
yeah.
are smoking the hookah. They don't smoke otherwise. They don't do any other kind of thing, but they love their hookahs and
Yeah.
fragrant hookahs.
And then comes the carpet, as we are talking about, that how rugs and carpet became a signature stamp of Mughals.
So, have you noticed that in India we never had a floor covering before the Mughals? We used to do matti ka lep.
Yeah.
We used to keep the coolness in our homes by doing for want of a better word for lep, a kind of a mild covering with
Layering of
layering
the floor, yeah.
with mud. But with the Mughals came the carpets, and I think they came because they were living in tented accommodation.
Yes.
So they always had these rugs and carpets, and you see a lot of them when Mir Sayyid Ali, Abdus Samand, they did their early paintings. You had a lot of the carpet weaves also in their paintings, and they translated it. And in their uh, carpets, you also again have a huge amount of different styles, and it depends where it came from. Which part of Iran did it come, or did it come from Afghanistan? Because you have the Klims with their geometric patterns, and then you have the Central Asian with their floral patterns and borders. You have different materials which they use. There is a kind of a rough wool which is used, and then you have those very finely knotted silken carpets which literally shimmer as you walk across. And they are beautifully knotted and they look almost like embroidered pieces. You can't even think how beautifully they were woven and how many shuttles were used to weave those carpets. Sometimes it took a lifetime to weave a carpet. And it all depends on the delicacy of the way the weave is used, that the value of the carpet is assigned to it. And most of them were in Kashmir, but you had a lot of carpet weaving centers, what in the old days used to be known as the central provinces, Bardoi.
Yeah. Bhadoi.
Yeah. All these areas, they became great carpet weaving
Yes.
centers, and a lot of the that's why you
Mirzapur.
Mirzapur also, and that's why you see a great amount of Muslim communities also staying there, because they also moved with where they got employment.
Yeah.
And these became great centers because the rulers of these states were patronizing them. There were many Hindu rulers who loved the Mughal aesthetics, and they welcomed Mughal artists. Post the Mughal era, in the 18th, 19th century, you see a kind of a increase, you see an effervescence of the afterlife, as we said, of Mughal beauty
Yeah.
emerging.
The afterlife also came with the British coming in, and then they were like, one of the things they were really good was in documentation. So they were able to document all this, and also they loved the things from India, and and people who were in company and who were like posted in India, they went back, so they were called as nabobs, and they were like carrying loads of Indian luxury and which we call as loots, but then they think that this is their collection, and that kind of also made these things like then further objects of desire, the respect for it actually, and they were seen as lavish things in England as well.
If you see the resident and many generals, as you rightly said, they wanted to dress like Nawabs in the evenings. You can't, for example, David Octoloni would wear Indian clothes, would sit with his Indian concubines or wives, or you see a William Fraser dressed in Indian clothes. They loved the Indian muslins. They loved the Indian prints. You see the lovely palanfors which they took back, and the V&A and the British V&A in particular is full of the beautiful paisley shawls that we have. It's full of objects of great beauty which they took from here. And if you see many of the objects at Buckingham Palace, they were gifts from the Indian rulers to the Prince Consort when he came to India and traveled to India. And rulers from Indian states came and presented him with objects of absolute beauty. And all of them, whether it was the resident commissioner, whether it was Robert Clive, whoever it was, took loads of stuff from India. In fact, Ira Mukhotri writes in her book, particularly the kind of luxurious albums also which they got painted and took back to their country as memorabilia. So all this was happening in the major centers where there was Muslim power, particularly in Awadh.
Yeah. So one of the things which happened with as Mughals kind of their power kind of disintegrated, the artists remained, and then they also like scattered with their own different patterns. Some of them were like British, and then they kind of started working with them, and then we can see that now when we are recording this in 2026, and we can see how much of all that remains in the today's bridal wear. When we go to the hotel lobbies, when you go look at the carpets, rugs, and jewelry, which is like, again, to my mind, I mean, one of the thing which luxury would mean in terms of the inheritance in India would be very much or so much Mughal.
So I just want to take the name of the Taj hotels, for example. So if you see in all the Taj hotels, which I love because I think we also like it because of the afterlife of the beauty of the novels, they recreate a lot of Mughal aesthetics in their lobbies, in their interiors, and architecturally too, because the Falaknuma Palace, though it's not Mughal, but it's definitely Turkish and of the Deccan Sultans, and you see how they have preserved the beauty or the afterlife of Mughal splendor, but the Deccanese splendor was different, a little different. It had more Turkish and more Persian influences. But in the bridal wear in particular, embroideries, kashidas, why go that far? Look at Punjab, the Phulkari. It came from Gulkari.
Yeah.
It came from Central Asia. So if you see their motifs, they were earlier very geometrical. The colors came from there. And then they were taken in by the local embroidery traditions in Punjab, and it became Phulkari, which is about flower. Gul, Phul.
Yeah.
So it became
like one of the designers, like the Sabyasachi Mukherjee, has created a whole big design around the Mughal aesthetics, and we see it as in hotels, as we the luxury would have some kind of Air India had this whole Maharaja, which had just been like changed, but then that all reminds of that India's past and linked to that glory. We again had to go to the pietra, dura, flower of the Taj Mahal, from where we began, and then talking about the artists, the people who are doing it, because it's not cutting the 5 different kind of stones, and even that is a kind of it. Each stone is like differently cut. It has a different, and putting it all together is like who were doing it, and how do we know about those artists?
So, they were, I don't know if I want to call them artists like that, or were they the Indian craftspeople, the Indian artisans? But they were all Indian. The ideas came from outside of the Mughal aesthetics, but it was all executed by the local people. And what we see here is that it was also a relationship between memory and emotions. That is very, very important. It was also a very sensory and courtly elegance that you see which emerges, because I want to go back to the ither for this, the ither, because what was it? The ither was actually a spiritual offering and it had a sacred ritual to it. We do not really in our yagyas present itra. We do madhu, we do milk, honey, ghee, that is part of our thing. The itra, the perfume, came as a sacred thing with the Mughals. And what we see is that there became a very close relationship between scent, memory, and emotion. And the body, because you put it on the body, you put it on the clothes, the body becomes a site of refinement and ornamentation. And here I find a similarity with Hindu culture, because the body or sharira becomes a very important thing when we look at the manifestations of divinity. For them, it is through smell, but for us, it is through the body. But the body becomes a common motif and a
The common
meeting
ground and the
point, because the itra is used in the body.
as a medium as well. That
Yeah.
body becomes the medium because
So it also becomes a object of intimate luxury, courtly elegance, and we also see in the itar dance, which are basically like lotuses, it brings in a kind of, because the lotus stands for purity, for enlightenment. So therefore, again, the body and the lotus become a common point for both.
so this is very interesting. So how do we see in terms of editing all of this out? Because at one level we see lots of millions of Indians like being part of this whole journey, assimilating, bringing in all the diversity and kind of creating something very beautiful and aesthetic about it. In a way that India is identified through those structures, motifs, and on the other hand, we see there's a kind of a tendency which talks about, which wants to edit it out, if not delete it. So, that is a thing which probably how do we see that, and how does India navigate to the future with these two thought lines?
You know, Nidheesh, you can neither delete it nor edit it, because it's here to stay. It's embedded in our consciousness. It's part of what you call Indian aesthetics. You cannot edit, you cannot delete it. How can you delete a layer of your skin? So it is through, it's actually under your skin. So you can't delete it.
And it's done by people who are living in India, like artisans we are talking about, Banaras and Bhadohi and Mirzapur and Kashmir and
No, I'll just tell you a few things like the floral motifs. This is very central to the Mughal ornament. It is very central to Mughal textiles. It is very central to Zardozi and weaving. And flowers are central to India. Flowers are central as a metaphor of worship.
yeah.
Right? And also decoration. So you can't wipe the flowers out. You can't wipe out the imagery of the rivers of paradise. We have our sacred rivers. Can you wipe out the legacy of floral motifs in textiles, architecture, and our buildings? Can you wipe out Zardozi block printing Phulkari? Can you wipe out the whole concept of the karkhanas which are still existing today? You mentioned Sabhyasachi. He works in a karkhana.
Yeah.
He's employed people, they work like a karkhana. And then you have this whole movement from courtly culture to everyday life. That's what the Mughals did. They brought in the metaphors, the motifs, the symbols from their court life to the everyday life, like when you said hukka pani band kar diya. The hookah from there came down to the common man. So you have all that happening. How can you delete, wipe out, erase? There can be no eraser. It is a continuum. It is part of the process of understanding and appreciation of aesthetics. It's there to stay.
Yeah. I mean, the way I will see it, I also see it like, it's like a dream project of any brand guru that they have gone, but the brand remains in so many ways. It exists and it continues to kind of impress us in that way. So coming to this end of this conversation, I come to that flower again from where we started, and that's like we are going back and back, and we can see it at so many places, right from a dupatta to a lehenga to a rug to a jali in a design in a modern architecture as well. And as you can see in this video, that remains, and we can keep marveling at it, that how this thing has its own journey beyond the Mughal rulers who came and went by, and it has left behind, and it remains functional for us. In the next episode, we will be talking about the Mughal legacy, the buildings, the architecture and the design they have left behind, and how are we holding it up, how are we preserving it, how are we expanding on it. And thank you for being with us. We'll continue to talk about 500 years of Mughals. And thank you, Dr. Pandey, for this conversation. And we will see you in our next episode. Stay with us. Thank you.
Thank you.